Hello, I'm ThriceRisen,
I'm Jacob.
and we are back after much not backness.
Deliberation.
Yes, because, well, quite frankly, it's a historic time.
It is. I feel like this is a legendary moment in Magic's history.
There's a lot of history.
Yeah, honestly, and everything just feels so right.
Yes. We're talking about the newest upcoming release. Where are we going? What's the plane again?
You know, I don't think we've ever been to this plane before. Actually,
I certainly have never been to this plane
I don't
before.
remember ever being part of a Magic set where we were on this particular plane. Therefore, it must be new.
Yeah, it has to be a new plane.
Obviously. Domi. It's like Dominaria.
Dominaria? That sounds
Yes.
like a terrible medical condition.
Yeah, I've had it for years, actually. It's very expensive.
To acquire or deal with?
Well, it's a little bit of both. But there are certain kinds of things you can only have if you buy just the whole package. You know what I'm saying?
Let's talk about Dominaria. So, Dominaria is, as we stated, a legacy, historic sort of a set, and they've done something really interesting. Well, they've done a lot of really interesting things, but we have a new card type.
Yes.
The Sagas of Dominaria.
And that is a subtype.
It's a
as opposed to
subtype of
a
enchantment.
supertype.
Yeah, a subtype of enchantment. And how they work is really simple. They do something when they enter, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, or after your draw step, they get a saga counter, and when they reach their third saga counter, they sacrifice.
It's been compared to effects like Suspend or, Vanishing, Fading, that kind of thing, with the notable exception that Sagas do something every time the lore counter progresses.
Yes, and Proliferate is also pretty good for these as well.
Yes.
So, and the really awesome thing about these sagas is not just introducing a new mechanic. It's introducing or reacquainting us with the history of this plane.
Right.
For those of you who are just tuning in Magic terms, Dominaria is the plane upon which the first 10 years of Magic took place. There were planeswalkers and they went everywhere else, but they were always coming back to Dominaria. Their headquarters were there, all the action was happening there. Dominaria was stated to be the nexus of the multiverse. And that's kind of shifted more towards Ravnica now, where everything's starting to revolve around Ravnica more. But this set, the 25th anniversary of Magic, they decided to go back to Dominaria. They brought on Dr. Richard Garfield, the creator of this game, to help design the set, and I've said it shows. The last set he worked on, if my information is correct, he worked on the original Innistrad set.
Very popular, very successful set.
Very successful, and I think this set's going to be right up there.
Dominaria is in a lot of ways like the fatherland of Magic, to where a lot of the original players who've been playing since the 90s feel like we're getting to go home. And in addition, since some of you may be newer to the lore and maybe reading into this now, Dominaria featured pre-mending planeswalkers, which had powers far and beyond the planeswalkers that we see now that the mending has occurred.
We were basically gods.
Yes. The reason that Urza and Mishra's War was so significant is because it was basically like Theros if the gods were not just over a planet, but over a multiverse.
Yeah. And it was really interesting stuff to read out. I started Magic back right a month before 2014, M2014 dropped. So I missed all of this. So these sagas are a really great way to get acquainted with the history of this plane, because each one is telling a story that is related to something that the older players have experienced directly.
Right. when older players hear names like Yawgmoth, Girard, they're going to know right off the bat who these people are. But this set will be a great way for those who have come to Magic more recently to understand some of the foundations it was built upon.
Yeah, very great way to get acquainted with the history. So let's start with these sagas, with the history of Benalia. It is an enchantment saga. It is worth noting, by the way, that sagas are not legendary. So that's very important, because legendary is very important in this set, and we'll get into that a bit later. But History of Benalia, you're really stoked for this card, so I'll let you take it away and tell us what it does.
The first successful deck I ever had in my Magic career was Mono White Weeny. And if this card does not almost single-handedly enable that strategy, I don't know what does. This is far and away my favorite card in the set. So as per tradition, we're encountering it first. So it's 1 white for an enchantment saga. Upon entry, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Not bad, pretty good. And then on the second lore of the saga, you create yet another 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. So the keyword there is very good, in that it's not just a 2/2, it's a 2/2 with an upside in the form of a keyword. And not only that, but it really does, I mean, it seems simplistic, but it really does show the founding of Benalia.
They're building forces, they're gathering the army together.
Yeah, this is a culture where things like knighthood, chivalry are important to the culture of the people who live there. And then last but not least, when it hits its final lore counter and you sacrifice it, it says that knights you control gain +2/+1 until the end of the turn. So this kind of demonstrates the empowering or the furthering of Benalia as a major power. And not only that, but mechanically even, as a card, this is very powerful. Because if you're playing, turn 1 creature, turn 2 creature, turn 3 this, by the time this actually triggers, you could have anywhere from 3 to even 6 knights that are affected by this ability.
Yeah, and even in a vacuum, it's producing a 2/2, a 2/2, so that's 4 power, and then they go up by 2, so it's producing 8 power for the cost of 3 mana and 3 turns, basically.
Yeah, essentially. So you have to wait a little bit, but at the same time, it's almost like an investment, like Planeswalkers, to where they continue to pay dividends after you pay the initial cost.
Actually, very interesting that you should mention Planeswalkers here, because this type of card design was what they were originally thinking when they were designing Planeswalkers. They were thinking that it was going to function in this sort of way where it does something when you play it, it ticks through, and then the Planeswalker leaves. They Planeswalk away. Now, the Planeswalkers we have are what they settled on, but this was kind of the original idea that they were kicking around for Planeswalkers.
And so it's no surprise that we see this kind of mechanic in a set where Dr. Richard Garfield is returning as well.
Absolutely. It's great to have someone from Magic's Antiquity coming into this set, and by that segueing into the next saga, which is the Antiquities War.
Yes.
Dealing with the Antiquities War, which was fought between Urza and his brother Mishra. Mishra was not a Planeswalker.
He was not.
Urza ascended at the climax of that fight, and there's another card commemorating that, and we'll talk about that another time. The one thing I'll complain about in general about these sagas, and this is a general complaint, doesn't apply to all of them. A lot of them, their mana cost is a little high. So they're coming down later, and then you have to wait several turns to get the full oomph from them.
Right.
So that's the one thing I might complain about a little bit, but then again, realistically looking at it, if they were cheaper than they are, they'd probably be too good.
Yeah, and I think with what Wizards saw ended up happening with both energy and vehicles in the bannings of Smuggler's Copter and some energy pieces, I think Wizards might have been a little hesitant to so strongly push a new mechanic.
Yeah.
On the chance that it would end up being too strong.
Now, they're still quite good. Antiquities War, if you like artifacts, you're gonna like Antiquities War. It costs a blue and 3, and when it enters on 1, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it does this on 1 and on 2. Then for 3, artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn.
So it gives you the artifacts to find in its first two, and then empowers those artifacts in a fashion we've seen before on various cards.
Many cards, Tezzeret and all kinds of other cards.
So this card, I think, is perfect for its color. It's a definite color win.
Yes.
It's blue, so it cares about card advantage, and it also cares about artifacts. And it does exactly what a blue player wants it to do, which is find them more card advantage.
Cards. Yeah, card advantage. Now, the first saga that was spoiled, this next one we're talking about, is probably one of my favorite sagas in color, art, and function. That is Phyrexian Scriptures. It costs 2 black and 2. On 1, it puts a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. That creature becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. On 2, destroy all non-artifact creatures. And on 3, exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards.
So this is very interesting because on the one hand it says, hey, you know that creature that you like to have, that you don't want to die? I'm going to kill everything but that thing. Which, of course, makes black feel a lot more valuable. And then finally, last but not least, once it's killed all their creatures, assuming they're not playing artifact creatures, it's going to go ahead and get rid of them so that strategies like Golgari or any number of things can't then get those creatures right back.
Yeah, and the flavor of it is so thematically on point because first you're completing something with an EA, you're turning something into an artifact creature. Then you're killing everything that's not an artifact creature.
Yes.
And then you're scouring away all remembrance of it.
In my opinion, this is possibly one of the best flavor wins of the sagas, which are just dripping with flavor to begin with. Because if you read some of the flavor text from some of the Phyrexian cards, like some of the quotes from Jin Gataxias about perfection being a journey rather than a destination, or I might have gotten those two switched up, but it's definitely in line with the ideology of the Praetors.
Yes. And what's interesting, and I wish I could remember it, some people who are far greater nerds than us two have looked at the art for Phyrexian Scriptures and have translated the Phyrexian that is on it.
Really?
And it was really, really thematic and on point.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't remember what the translation was. Look it up in your own time.
Do it.
It was pretty awesome. Or at least as far as we can tell, because there hasn't been an official release of what it is.
Right.
But using the judge promo of Elish Norn, who we know what the flavor text is for her,
yes,
and the text is for her, they've kind of constructed a rudimentary Phyrexian alphabet, and they're using it to translate these cards.
Very cool.
But the next saga, moving through the Wooburg color cycle, is the first Eruption. And the art for it is fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the sagas feature this like old tapestry or monument type art, and it's fantastic. But the first Eruption is a red and 2. On 1, the first Eruption deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. If you like tokens, I'm sorry.
If you like goblins, I'm sorry.
If you're on, and then it goes on 2 to add 2 red mana to your mana pool. Which they're doing away with the phrase, to your mana pool, they're just saying add 2 red. On 3, sacrifice a mountain. If you do, the first Eruption deals 3 damage to each creature.
Right. So this card has a lot of things going for it. If you look at it right on the surface, it's not exactly a traditional red aggressive card. It's almost on the more control-y side of things where it says, your opponent, you recognize that your opponent's going to play some small creatures, maybe an Elvish Mystic or a Goblin, or even a 2/1 Knight, and you go ahead and you just wipe the small things. Then the next thing it does is it gives you more mana to kind of jump ahead of your opponent, and I really like the phrasing on the third one because it gives you the option. If it's favorable for you to do so, you can deal 3 damage to all creatures.
You can blow the cap on the mountain.
Yeah. But then if it's now you're ahead and you don't want that to happen, it gives you the option to withhold.
And this card, I saw someone mentioning, and I'm surprised you haven't said this.
Oh my.
This card, in every set they like to have some cards that are printed for the sets in the future, and sets that synergize prior. This card is amazing with dinosaurs.
That it is, yep, because it's going to trigger all sorts of enrage all over the place, multiple times.
Yes.
And the extra mana will certainly help you get out a Carnage Tyrant.
It's a really great include for your red-based dinosaur decks.
Oh, yes.
you're going to wreck a lot of things, which, if things are broken, they need to be mended. And our next card is the Mending of Dominaria, which is a little sad because, what's her name? The woman who turned into Phage.
Right, I can't remember her pre-Phage name.
We're terrible because I literally just read this earlier today. But she's not on the monument, and they went on Twitter and asked why isn't she on the Art of the Mending, because she was very instrumental in the mending. And they said, well, here's the deal. This monument that's depicted in the Art of the Mending is from a continent that I can't remember how it's pronounced, but it's a sister landmass to Zalfir. And because this character whose name still escapes me, because she was responsible for Zalfir being permanently phased out, she's not remembered too fondly. And so they left her off the artifact.
Yeah, that makes a little bit of sense.
So, the lore of the card notwithstanding, what does this card do? First of all, it's 2 green and 3 for the Enchantment Saga. On 1 and 2, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It's pretty good.
It's not bad.
It's card advantage, card selection. And then 3, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, then shuffle your graveyard into your library.
So this has a few things for you. If you're on the Golgari kind of mill plan, or you have any intention of reanimating creatures, then it's certainly going to be of value.
All hail the Hypnotoad.
The final bit actually reminds me of a merfolk we just got, who mills when he attacks, and then gets back all your lands when he dies. So it's possible that this kind of strategy of dumping your library into your graveyard, then getting most of it back, could be relevant in this set.
And there are cards that care about lands entering a little bit, and again, the flavor of this is on point. You're losing some things, you're getting some things back, and at the end of it, the land is restored.
Right. Very flavorful.
Speaking of restoring lands, not really. Fall of the Thran is a 5 and 1 white Enchantment Saga, so it's expensive. What's it do? Oh, nothing big. On 1, it destroys all lands.
All of them.
All of them.
Unless you have an indestructible land.
But on 2 and 3, it says each player returns 2 land cards from their graveyard to the battlefield.
So this kind of effect, in my experience, is designed. Well, you got to be ready for it. The bright side is you know when you're playing. You know you're playing it in your deck. You know your opponent's probably not playing it in theirs, so you can choose when to pull the trigger. The idea behind destroying all lands, not just your opponent's, is you get up to a point where your board state is so advantageous that you remove your opponent's ability to deal with it for long enough that you can win by doing so. The second and third parts are really interesting. They had to make the card fair. So each person should be able to get some lands back. And then, after the full force has been felt, the game kind of gets back to a normal-ish state.
You know where I see this working? It dovetails really nicely into History of Benalia, because you're making tokens by itself. You're making probably white Weeny.
Yeah.
And then when you hit that 6-drop curve, I have a board state of cheap things.
Right.
Blow up everything, and then as we recover, I can recover faster because my stuff is on the cheap side.
The problem that Weenie or aggro strategies run into, if they can't kill fast enough, is eventually the player with the more expensive spells starts winning out on value. They start dropping a Carnage Tyrant, they start dropping a Fumigate, they start playing these things that can deal with your strategy when your entire deck caps out at like 3. So, granted, this is an expensive option for a deck like that, but what this does for you is it says, if the game goes long, I'm going to win with my method and stop you from using yours.
Because basically, what in the Weenie type of strategy, this card is basically saying, we've gotten to turn 6, and I haven't... Some decks, you know, killing him by turn 6 is what you want to do. It's not always possible. Sometimes it'll be turn 7 or 8. But if you're looking at past turn 6 and you're really not doing well, you're saying, let's go back to turn 1.
Right.
So, and then the next turn will be turn 2, and then turn 4.
You know what I think this pairs well with, in a way, actually, is one of the previous sagas we looked at, which was the first Eruption. Because the second mode on the first Eruption can really get you that extra mana you need to then play Fall of the Thran. Same thing with Chandra Torch of Defiance, even. I mean, if you wipe the board, if you wipe all lands and you have a Planeswalker out and they don't, that incremental value is really going to matter.
And then the third mode on first eruption, since by the time it triggers it, depending on how you stagger it, you'll have gotten a mountain back.
Yep.
You sacrifice it and then blow up any creatures they've managed to have.
Right, or any ones they still had from the initial wave.
It's very true.
So let me ask you this then. This isn't a card control decks are going to want to play.
Probably not. Control decks value having their mana and having their lands. It would have to be a very peculiar type of control deck. Maybe a creature-based control deck. There are cards like Aven Mind Sensor in Standard. There are cards like Damping Sphere coming into Standard.
Yes.
So there are some permanent-based control strategies, but we'd have to see what materialize. I think this is more of a, as we were saying, a weenie aggro strategy to go, let's knock the clock back a little bit.
Right.
And play the game that I want to play, which is in the early turns of the game. It's a risky conjecture.
It is.
Another risky conjecture is the Murari conjecture, which is a blue and 4 enchantment saga. It's on 1, it says return target instant card from your graveyard to your hand. On 2, return target sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And on 3, until end of turn, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. It's pretty strong if you're on instants and sorceries.
Right.
So this is the saga I could see maybe some kind of control deck running.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to get your counter spells back, you're going to get your removal back, and then on the last turn, granted, it's not perfect for control decks because it's all activating on your turn.
Right. And
you'd really like to... that 3, if it said until the end of your next turn, it would be perfect for control decks.
So it actually makes me wonder if this would be a good curve topper for the blue-red Wizards deck.
Absolutely.
That are looking to get back like Wizard Lightning or
burn spells,
yeah.
things like that.
And
Absolutely.
And then copy to kind of out-prowess their opponent.
Yeah.
Again, blue with the card advantage, really nailing the head of what blue players are looking for.
This is also one of my favorite arts from the set.
It's very nice.
The art's fantastic.
It reminds me of the Constellation level up screen from Skyrim.
One way you're not going to level up in Dominaria is if you join the Cabal, because the Cabal, most of them just want to die.
They seem pretty strong.
And the Rite of Belzenlock is kind of the Cabal's influence on the sagas here. A side note on Belzenlock, I've stated this online before, I love the villain of Belzenlock, and here's why. Because Dominaria is a set about history, about nostalgia, and the memories that we as players have had, not all of us, but some of the older ones, of this set, and for us newer players, at least the nostalgia of knowing that this is where our game began. And Belzenlock, what is he doing? He is taking credit for every major historical event. He's saying, oh, the Black Blade? Yeah, I made that. I killed the Elder Dragon with it. Oh, the Cabal? I'm the Patriarch of the Cabal. He's erasing that history. So the villain in this historic set is an enemy of history itself. I think it's great. But the Rite of Belzenlock, 2 and 2 black, on 1 and 2, create 2 0/1 black cleric creature tokens. So you get 4 creatures in the first 2 turns of this being there.
For those who don't know, black loves to sacrifice creatures.
And we're getting there because on 3, you create a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying trample, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice another creature. If you can't, this creature deals 6 damage to you.
So that's kind of similar to a couple demons we've seen before. The notable difference there being that most of the older demons said tap and, so with this one you at least still get to attack with it. And so this is kind of almost like a demonic rite of where these clerics are summoning this demon.
And then sacrificing themselves to it.
Right.
You know what really messes with the Rite of Belzenlock?
What's that?
The first eruption.
That it does.
You've made 4 clerics, they all die.
Hell die. There's a mountain. Why didn't they see the mountain over there?
There's too much fire. Too much fire in this set.
Too much flame.
The Flame of Keld is our next saga. For 1 and a red. This is probably one of the best, most powerful sagas.
This one embarrasses me a lot.
Really good.
When I first read this card, I thought you could play more than one of it in a single turn. And then I realized how incredibly wrong that is. I was thinking, like, I'm going to play 1, 2, 3 all in the same turn. This is going to be amazing.
No, because on 1, you discard your hand, so that doesn't work.
Yes.
But on 2, you draw 2 cards. And then on 3, if a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus 2 to that permanent or player instead.
Fantastic.
3, in my opinion, largely irrelevant.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, we see red as a color dumps its hand, or has the ability to dump its hand faster than any other color strategy. And not only that, but the whole discard your hand then draw, X cards is something we've seen work in red before.
Mm-hmm. Madness and other things. But here's why I say 3 is largely irrelevant. Because it all hinges on 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because on turn 2 or turn 1, if you have a handy card called Simian Spirit Guide,
oh my,
you go turn 1 land, turn exile Simian Spirit Guide, cast Flame of Kel, dump your whole hand into the graveyard, and then on turn 2, you draw 2 cards. I mean Dredge.
Dredge 2 cards.
This card, I'm calling it now, people are going to be I'm not saying it's going to do well in Dredge. I'm not confident enough to say that. People are going to brew with Dredge with this card.
Interesting.
Just to see, because you're drawing 2.
Yeah.
And so...
and then your card for turn.
Turn 1, Simian Spirit Guide, Flame of Kel, dump your Dredge stuff in the yard.
Sure.
Turn 2, you draw your card for turn, Dredge, 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 Dredge.
Right.
And then you draw 2 at the beginning of your pre-combat main, Dredge, 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 Dredge.
Right.
And you've just thrown a huge amount of cards in your graveyard.
That's pretty spicy. I mean, that could even work almost in, what's that card? It cascades into Living Death or Living End, where they get back all their cycling creatures from the graveyard.
I mean, Living End maybe, but I'm thinking Dredge just because of how it's going to play.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can find on that 3rd turn some kind of card to reanimate everything or do something to get your creatures in play, and if they happen to be red, then the 3rd ability is useful. But I think the 3rd ability for Dredge is largely irrelevant.
This actually doesn't pair too bad with Follow the Thran, because when you discard your hand, you might lose, a few land that then you could get back with Follow the Thran. So there's some interesting interactions possible with multiple sagas.
So, speaking of mana, the Song of Frailes, our next one, it's probably right up there with some of the cheaper sagas. It's pretty good in the right deck.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not a card I would consider to be universally good. It's good in the right brew. For 1 and a green, on 1 and 2, it says, until your next turn, creatures you control gain tap. Add 1 mana of any color. Of any color. It's pretty good. And then on 3, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn.
So that's fun.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're running a bunch of cheap creatures that you can spit out pretty quick,
yeah,
or if you're running elves, to go, hey look, my elves are now all mana dorks.
Yep.
And then they all get +1/+1 and gain keyword soup, courtesy of our friend Frailes. It's a pretty powerful play.
This is going to be very good with a certain green 3-drop we haven't discussed yet. So here's the thing. All of the sagas fuel themselves, if that makes sense. The first 2 steps, or the first saga, leads into the rest of the card. So you might get to this one and say, it doesn't seem to quite fit that pattern. So what this does for you is it enables your creatures to tap so that you essentially have more mana for that turn. More mana means putting out more creatures.
You're dumping as many creatures as you can in those first 2 turns.
So that when you get to 3, you have more creatures out to utilize that ability.
And you don't want to drop this on turn 1, although you very easily could drop it on turn 2.
Yeah.
With cards like Land of War Elves, which is being reprinted. But you want to drop this a little later, when you've got a couple creatures out, because you're immediately benefiting from that mana. So ideally what you would do is you would play it when you have enough creatures to immediately tap them and play something else.
You'll want to play this probably somewhere between like turn 4, turn 5, once you already have creatures out that this can utilize.
Yeah, because the Land of War Elves are already tapping for mana, so...
So that being the case, the reason it still costs 2 mana is so that you can still do something else.
Now, there is a 1-drop blue bird in this set that if you're running Simic, you could power out some stuff pretty quick that way.
It's true.
But, let's look at the next one. It's worth noting that they did not print an equal amount of sagas for all the colors. We're done with red and green. Now it's just white, blue, black, and black has the most because Dominaria has a bit of a black past.
A lot.
But that past was averted thanks to the Triumph of Girard, which is a 1 and white enchantment saga. On 1 and 2, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control with the greatest power. It's reverse bolster.
Yeah, it empowers the powerful.
And then on 3, target creature you control with the greatest power gains flying, first strike, and lifelink until end of turn.
We've actually seen that combination of keywords before. It's kind of like they become almost like this hero in a way. Johnny had a +1 that gave that kind of thing. We see that on some of the knights in this set.
Here, kid, go be amazing.
So what this essentially does for you is it takes your greatest creature and makes them just an absolute champion. And the thing that makes this card work is its low mana cost. Like the fact that it only costs 2. You can drop it relatively early if you have a turn 1 creature. And then there's not really any drawbacks to playing it early either, like there might have been with the green one.
And you could even dovetail this nicely into the history of Benalia. If you have a 1-drop, then you play this, it puts a counter on it. Then you play history, you get a knight token, and the creature that was already there is probably bigger, so it gets bigger again.
Yeah.
And then you get another knight token, and then your creatures get bigger in attack, and then on the next turn they get bigger in attack again.
If I'm not mistaken, if you have 2 sagas activating at the same time, you would get to choose which one resolves first.
Correct.
Unless there's some kind of weird timestamp stuff going on. So then, theoretically, the knights you get off of History of Benalia, you could resolve those before you resolve the +1 counter.
It's interesting you should mention time.
It's time.
Time of Ice is our next saga. 3 and a blue. On 1 and 2, tap target creature an opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Time of Ice.
Disgusting.
And on 3, return all tapped creatures to their owner's hands. This is a card that you would benefit from playing one after another.
Oh, absolutely.
So on the first turn, you tap a creature. On the second turn, you untap, go to your main, it taps a second creature, you play a third one, tap something, and then untap, it taps something else, and then bounce everything. So you can, depending again on timestamps, for Time of Ice, it's either timestamp or if you get to choose how the abilities go on the stack, then you could get anywhere from 3 to 4 creatures boomeranged.
Yeah, it's a great way to slow down their biggest threat and give blue the time it needs to get everything set up.
And it's got to be very tormenting for your opponent.
Oh yeah, just the absolute certainty of knowing that this creature is useless, and then on top of that is going to have to be cast again is crazy. Tormenting.
Chainer's Torment is our next one. 3 and a black. On 1 and 2, it deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. Good commander card because it says each opponent.
It does.
You don't gain life equal to life lost this way.
Right.
But then on 3 it does something, it kind of heel face turns you a little bit. On 3 you create an XX Black Nightmare Horror creature token, where X is half your life total rounded up. Seems pretty cool.
Yeah.
But then it deals X damage to you.
Whew, that's a bit much. Yeah, if you could find a way to give it lifelink, that'd be something, but...
That would be funny.
So I've heard some disputes about this one. Some people are not super certain on it. It definitely caters to a specific kind of strategy.
It's the risky life-paying sort of black.
Yeah. Because, I mean, if this works and you get, like, an 11/11 token or something like that, that's pretty significant.
Yeah. Or if you're playing Commander, it'll be like a 20-some-odd big thing.
Absolutely massive.
The Elvis Reborn is our last saga, depicting the resurrection of Nicobolas. Yes, for all you people who are reading the story who are new, Nicobolas was killed before and it didn't take. So, keep that in mind. 4 and a black for the Elvis Reborn. On 1, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. On 2, each opponent discards a card. And on 3, put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control.
Nice.
Kinda has the typical Bolas vibe of Cruel Ultimatum. Kinda hits some of those notes.
Yep.
And it's just a really powerful control piece.
And I really like the way its third ability gives you kind of 2 options in a way. Because first they have to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, then they have to discard a card, which may also be a creature or planeswalker, and then finally you get to choose something from a graveyard. So if they don't have anything you want and yours does, bring it on back, including Nicol Bolas.
Yeah, it's true.
If he ends up in your graveyard.
I'll reanimate myself.
So it is interesting to note then that this could interact with the Bolas planeswalker we saw from Amonkhet.
Yeah, he can reanimate himself. It's very thematic.
You know, Bolas tribal with that white 1-drop that says whenever you cast a Grixis spell, gain life.
All right, well, that concludes the Sagas of Dominaria. We'll be talking about some of the other historic, literally, cards in this set in our next video, so tune in for that. Thank you for watching. I'm ThriceRisen.
I'm Jacob.
See you next time.